Hey, this is Sean, and welcome to Colored Bean Academy. Now, today we're going to be talking about scaling graphic assets very, very quickly and very accurately without any guesswork. Now, before we get into that, since this is the very first video, I want to address something that's very, very, very important to me. And that is this video, and actually all of these upcoming videos, are not going to be perfect. They're going to have lots of rough edges. You're going to get room noise and squeaky chair and all with my window rattling. You're going to get some imperfect visuals. I'm not always scripting every one of these things. But the reason for that, aside from the fact that just finding time, the reason for it is that imperfect and finished is better than something perfect that you can't get done every single time. It is true for competitions very, very much, and it's absolutely true in real life and in the real world. You hand somebody a finished product that is maybe doesn't have the last little bit of fit and polish. You might get some grumbles, but you can run with it in a pinch. You hand somebody something that is incomplete, they're just going to look at you and say, "Why are you even giving this to me?" So, that being said, let's jump into it. This right here is the mechanical design that we did for the state competition last year. And so some of you guys have actually done this competition if you were competing last year, and others are seeing this for the first time. So this is what it is. And one of the, one of the huge parts of any recreation is simply getting all of the elements scaled correctly. And in each program, in Photoshop, in Illustrator, and in InDesign, whichever one you choose, there is to varying degrees, a very, very quick way to do it accurately. So you shouldn't have to do any guesswork whatsoever. And I wanted to use this as an example because it's a good one. He's very, very irregularly shaped. In the parts that we can see, it would be easiest to measure probably from the tip of his nose right here to the right-hand edge of his hand. And that's not a straight shot. That's not even easy to measure between because we don't have a reference point down here. So at the end of the video, I'll actually show you a stupid simple trick for, not even a trick, a way to deal with that may not be blatantly obvious. But we'll get to that at the end. But the other big issue with him is that large parts of him are completely hidden. So whenever we drop him in place, there's more to him. The actual graphic is this. He's got big old wings. He's got a tail. He's got legs. And because we can't see those things, we can't measure how far out do his wings go, how far down does his tail go. So it makes it harder to scale him in here. Or at least it seems to be, but that's not the case, and I'm going to show you how. So, since we are in Illustrator, I'm going to go ahead and start in Illustrator. This happens to be what I chose to build the whole thing in to begin with. You can see over here all of my different layers that I built him in, and we'll do a whole separate video about this later on. There is always one application that's going to be easier or harder to do something in based on the design you're trying to do. And for this one, because almost all the elements were vector, and because there's a lot of graphic elements, it's not super text heavy. I don't have paragraphs and paragraphs of text where styles would be helpful. Illustrator was the best call for me. Now, could you have done this in Photoshop just as easily? Yeah, Photoshop probably would have been fine. InDesign would have been probably very, very difficult to recreate this in, and that may be what some of you guys chose. But again, we'll get into choosing the proper program for things, the proper application for things in a different video. For now, Illustrator for the start. So this is the document we originally got. And I gave multiple resources on the same document. Now, what I do not recommend is trying to place the entire thing in any program and then just masking out or cropping things out because it's just unwieldy. It's unnecessary. You should really isolate the parts that you need and just make them a document by themselves. Now, if you're in Illustrator, you just copy and paste them into your new document. In Photoshop, you can copy and paste them in as a smart object, or you could make a separate document. In InDesign, now InDesign you can copy and paste vector stuff into. If it was something like one of our silhouettes, then and that was all we were doing is just getting that silhouette in there, then I may just go ahead and paste the vector directly into InDesign and have it create a shape in InDesign. There's nothing wrong with doing that. When we get to more complex things, I don't recommend it. It's better to go ahead and just save it into a document by itself. And there is always a benefit to using a completely separate file that you actually place into the program. And that is, if that image were to get used in multiple places, then all you would have to do would be go back and change the original file, and it would get changed throughout. If they said, you know what, I love this design, the dragon we don't want red though, we actually changed his color to blue in the game. Then if you had pasted him in someplace, you would have to then go and make that change to every instance and update everyone individually. If you had placed a linked graphic, then you change one and it fixes it throughout. So in general, placing is going to be a better option. For something quick and dirty like a competition or a super quick turnaround on a deadline, and when there's not going to be a bunch of, it's a one-off deal. We have one dragon, it's one ad, we just stick him in there and deal with everything else later on. Anyway, I digress. So we have this guy right here, and I'm going to go ahead and copy him, Command-C, Control-C. In general, you guys should know this by now. Control on a PC, Command on a Mac are going to have the same function in Adobe stuff, and Alt on a PC and Option on a Mac are going to have the same function. So if I say Control and you're on a Mac, it's Command. If I say Alt on a PC and you're on a Mac, it's Option. I'm on a PC, I get them confused sometimes, and so I say the wrong thing. All right, so we grab this guy, we copy him, we make a new document. Now, this particular thing happens to be 7 by 9. So I'm going to start with the print profile, change to inches, 7 by 9. It happens to have an 1/8 inch bleed, so that's 0.125, and hit OK. So I paste them in here. Now, the absolute most valuable tool for resizing things in Illustrator, in InDesign, and in some ways, partly in Photoshop, is not a tool, it's a palette. And in Illustrator and InDesign, it's the transform palette. It's going to be a quick way. If I click on this guy, I see my measurements instantly right here. He is a little over 4 inches wide, a little over 4 3/4 inches tall. There's my width and height right there. But that's also where I can scale things. Now, I measured this thing already off of the original graphic, and from the tip of his nose to the tip of his hand right there should be 5 3/4 inches, 5.75 inches. Problem is, if I just click him and say, oh, okay, we'll do 5.75 and check my little, oops. If you don't have your box checked to begin with. If you ever don't have your box checked, or if you don't like to leave it checked because of the way you work, then all you have to do is hold Control or Command before you hit Enter, and that will constrain proportions for that one instance. Anyway, whenever I do that, it scales, so he's being measured from this edge to that edge, and that's not what we wanted, because from here to there is only a little over 4.5 inches, so that's not right. So what do we do instead? Well, in Illustrator, we don't have such a thing as a graphics box in Illustrator. There's talk about they're introducing them, and I think they have actually created, I think there is one in Photoshop now, but either way, I'm going to do old school. I'm just going to take a rectangle tool, And I'm going to drag a box that goes from the tip of his nose to the edge of his hand. And because I have to have some lower boundary anyway, the easiest place in the original to measure how far up he comes from the bottom edge of the whole document is the bottom tip of his thumb. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my box there as well, because I'll be able to use that, and that way I can kind of two birds, one stone. So there's a box, and you can see that starts there, ends there. That's the part we're trying to measure. Bottom of his thumb. All you have to do is grab both things at once. Him, make sure he's grouped. The box, object, clipping mask, make. So now we've effectively created a graphics frame. And you'll see now our dimensions have changed. It's now measuring the size of our clipping mask. So all I have to do, I said he was 5.75 inches wide from the tip of his nose to his fingers. Turn on the chain link, 5.75, boom. Now he's the exact correct size. And all I would have to do now is simply go release clipping mask. Before I do that though, let's do one more trick with it. While you've got him here, whenever I measured him in my document, let me turn my smart guides back on. When I measured him in my document, his nose was 0.3 inches from the left-hand edge, and the tip of his thumb was 1.45 inches from the bottom edge. Now, the numbers don't matter, but here's what does. Since I measured from the left and the bottom, I'm going to snap him down to the bottom left-hand edge. And when I measured from the trim line, not from the bleed. So that's why I'm doing it from my document edge, not my bleed edge. From here, I have two options. If I simply hit enter, as long as I've got my normal black arrow, I hit enter, and this is a shortcut for move. Horizontal, positive numbers go to the right, negative numbers go to the left. So I said, what did I say? 0.3 inches. Vertical, negative numbers go up, positive numbers go down, negative 1.45. Hit enter. Now he is perfectly placed. Object, release clipping mask, grab the box, and delete it. He is now perfect size and the perfect position as well, and ready to be masked the way he's supposed to be masked. Another way we can do this is to simply stay with the transform tool. Now, since we're not trying to define an exact coordinate, we're just doing a relative position, I don't have to worry about where that anchor point is. All I have to do is, so your X coordinate is your left and right, negative values go left, positive values go right, or I should say negative would move it. Taking away would move it left, adding to it would move it to the right. Y is your vertical, your up and down. Taking away would move it up, adding to it would move it down. So since we're at the bottom and the left edge, to go 0.3 inches to the right, we would simply put our cursor at the end, do plus 0.3 inches. And then from the bottom, we would say minus 1.45. And it's already in inches, so I don't have to put in the unit of measurement. And now he's in the exact same place he was before. Object, clipping mask, release. And the only thing left to do is simply grab the box by itself, the old one that we're not using anymore, and delete it. So now he's the perfect size and the perfect position, and we're completely done. Now, that's Illustrator. By the way, the same thing works if this were a photograph. You would still drop it in, use a rectangle as a clipping mask, scale it, and then release it, and it would still work just the same. Now, for InDesign, we do need this to be a completely separate file. So I'm going to go ahead and take my dragon, copy him, paste him into a new document, and I will go ahead and save him as, we'll say, Dragon Solo, and the Illustrator default is fine. All right, InDesign. Oops, not text frame. Sorry, I'm working around the giant microphone here so I don't have a clear view of my keyboard. Okay, 7 by 9. Now, the nice thing is in InDesign, we can actually just plug our margins in directly and not have to worry about doing guides or anything. And on this document, it happens to be 1/4 inch margins. And if you can't see the bleed, it's twirl down bleed and slug. It's 1/8 of an inch, 0.125, and hit OK. So in InDesign, File, there you go. I always use Control D. So File, Place, drag in Solo, drop them in place. Now in InDesign, he already has a box around it because every image, every graphic has a graphics box around it. So in that case, we'll just take the left-hand edge of the box by itself, drag it to his nose. Oops, I missed. I'm going to drag it up to the tip of his thumb and drag it in to the tip of his finger. From here, again, transform palette right over here. Again, we see that he's currently at a little over 3 1/4. We need to go to 5 3/4. There's 2 ways to do this. The first way is make sure that for when you've selected this guy, this auto fit checkbox is checked. And from there, if you make a transformation over here in the transform box, it will scale the contents along with it. Whenever you plug it in, 5.75, make sure you're holding Control or Command whenever you hit Enter, and that will make sure it does it proportionally. And then from here, so now he's the perfect size, we can do the exact same trick, snap him down to the bottom left-hand edge of the document, and then over here in our XY, we say, okay, we're going to add, so move to the right, 0.3 inches, and on the Y, we want to move him up by 1.45, so minus 1.45 inches. And then all we have to do is Object, Fitting, and Fit Frame to Content. Control-Alt-C or Command-Option-C. And now he's completely visible again, perfectly scaled, perfectly positioned, and we can now mask him as we need to. There is one other way to scale him that is not using that little auto-fit checkbox. And that is, once you have that box, come over here to the Scale tool, and don't click and drag, just double-click on the tool. You end up seeing a percentage, but all you have to do is type in 5.75 IN. The chain link's already checked, so it's going to be proportional anyway. Hit OK. And now that's the exact same thing as if we had gone up, auto fit, change this up here, Control, Enter. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Everything else is exactly the same. You fit that frame to content, and it just opens it up, and now you've got the full thing visible again. You still need to position him. Now, I will say this. If you chose to try and rebuild this particular thing in InDesign, you probably had a nightmare of a time. InDesign would not be an ideal thing for this type of graphic, but we'll actually do a whole different video on how to choose the right application. That's InDesign. Pretty straightforward. Same thing would work, again, with a photograph. Simply pull your box into reference points. And so if we had, you guys may recognize this windmill from way back when. If we had this windmill picture and it's already cropped in the thing we're trying to recreate, but what we can do is we can see the bottom, let's say we can see the top edge of that blade, and we can see the bottom edge of that blade. We just pull our box in like that. I'm not worried about the width right now. I'm going to let this thing go in a second anyway, and I'll just use the scale tool for this one. And the way I measured it on my page, I'm just making a number up here. Let's say that it was supposed to be 4 inches tall. I hit OK, and then expand that back out. Now, even though I need to figure out my position still, but I know that this is exactly the right size, and the only thing I have to mess with is my position. So, we're good. Finally, Photoshop. Now, Photoshop is not quite as straightforward as the others because there's no concept of a graphic frame. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and make a new document. This is in inches, 7 by 9, 300, CMYK because we're doing print. Photoshop has no concept of margins. It has no concept of bleeds. It is just for making graphics. It does not mean you can't do layout in it. You just have to do a little bit more extra work. So if you're doing something like this in Photoshop, my recommendation to get bleed marks and whatnot, or crop marks, however you want to put it, is to make your document the final trim size, okay, the final printed piece after it's been cut down, and simply drag down guides. Just do Control-R, Command-R to get your rulers if you're not used to having them up. This, by the way, is about the only thing the rulers are good for. They're not very good for measuring, ironically. Snap them to the outer boundaries of your document. It seems worthless right now, but just give me a second. Now go to Image and Canvas size, not image size, but canvas size. Leave relative turned on, centered. And if it's an 1/8 inch on every edge, then it's a 1/4 inch total to the total width and total height. And so now you have a perfect 1/8 inch bleed all the way around, and your guides function as your trim marks. And that's your final document size. So there's that. If we were doing the dragon, I mentioned we could simply paste him in as a smart object. He was the last thing I copied, so if I hit paste right now, smart object, he should come right in like that. And because he's a vector smart object, it doesn't matter how big I make him, he will always be re-rasterized at the document resolution from the original vector information. Oops. So we don't have to worry about scaling him up and down. He'll stay clean. That's one way of doing it. If it's a separate document, we would simply do File and either place embedded if we want him to be part of the document, or place linked if we want to keep the ability to modify the original document and have it update in Photoshop. Again, for a one-off deal like this, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It does not matter. Just get him in the document and get moving. Either way, if we placed linked, drag in solo, boom. Since I had him in there, though, I had him from Illustrator to begin with, there's no reason not to just paste him in. Okay. Now, I mentioned before that there is no such thing as a graphics box in Photoshop. That's a bit of a lie because it is possible now. I forgot that they have added this. This is what happens when you're old and things move and change around you. So I've added this graphics box around him, and honestly, I've never used one before. This is the first time I've ever touched it. I have no freaking clue how to get rid of it again, but let's see how this works. If I do free transform now, oh yay, okay. If I do free transform, it actually will do the actual boundaries of the frame and not of everything else. So that is awesome. The question is getting rid of it at the end, and if it's anything at all like a layer mask, I should be able to drag just this frame off of the layer into the trash can. Nope, that doesn't work. All right. That didn't work. All right, so if we want to get rid of just the frame by itself, then I would simply hold Control or Command and drag the frame to the trash can, and that will let go of things and get us back to our full image. So yay, we have a solution. I'm going to show you both ways, all right? In Photoshop in general, when you have an image, if the image as a whole is what you're dealing with, he was in there in his entirety, he wasn't cropped down in the final thing. If I do free transform, Control T, Command T, you get your free transform box, you come up here to the top, and you'll see your width and your height. 100% because it hasn't been touched yet. Even though when we see scaling, we see it in percentages, you're not locked to that unit of measurement. That's all percentage is, it's a unit of measurement. So we can come in here to width and go 5.75 IN and hit enter twice. There we go. And now he's perfectly sized. He's perfectly sized if we were trying to measure from here to there. Now, if we're using the latest and greatest in Photoshop, we have this graphics frame tool. Then we can treat this just like a clipping mask in Illustrator or a graphics box in InDesign. We can put it around him like this. We can do free transform, and we can say, put the chain link on, so constrained proportions, 5.75 inches. Hit enter, and now he is perfectly sized, and no, he's not. The graphics frame went by itself. Okay. Let's make sure, again, new, right? Let's make sure that both these items, so click, shift click, so I have the contents of the layer over here and the frame selected when I do this. Control T. Let's see if this fixes the issue. 5.75 inches. And boom. Yes, it did. All right. The important thing to remember when you're dealing with layers that have masks, that have any kind of, once you have any kind of a mask and a graphics frame is effectively acting as a mask, you now have two pieces of information on that layer. You've got the mask information and you have the layer contents. And in almost every instance, Photoshop lets you treat these completely separately. You can do something to one and not the other. I can filter a mask and not the image. I can filter an image and leave the mask alone, so on and so forth. So you have to make sure that you have that little white outline around both of them if you want to transform both. And you select them both the same way you select multiples in anything. You can hold Shift and click them both. You can hold Control and click them both. Either way, I would go ahead and do Shift because command clicking a layer thumbnail does something different in most everything else. Again, once he's to size, you can take him and hold Command or Control, drag just the frame to the trash can, and now he can be masked the way he needs to be. But that makes our life way too easy. Let's go ahead and pretend that life's hard, because life's hard, right? We've got this guy in here. We have no other way to, if I put a normal mask on him, the problem we run into, so there's a normal vector mask, right? If I do Control T, nope, I missed. If I do Control T, my transform box and therefore my measurement that it's telling me goes around the entirety of the original layer contents. And that is when I've got the two things together. So this isn't giving me an accurate measurement for what we're trying to do. So that doesn't work. The same thing would be true with a normal raster mask as well. So what do we do? Well, one of the best things for getting exact measurements in Photoshop, for me, is, again, not the rulers. The rulers are kludgy and almost worthless. The marquee tool, however, is freaking brilliant. And that is because up here for style, by default, we leave it at normal. Okay, that means just click and drag, make whatever you want to, blah, blah, blah. Fixed size, however, you can define an exact size. So in my case, 5.75 inches. I don't care about the height. And now, no matter what I do, if I click and drag, do whatever, I cannot do anything aside from make a marquee that is the exact size that I defined up there. Once I've got it, drag it to the right-hand edge, or an edge, whatever. Snap a guide to the left-hand edge. So I now know, and I'll deselect, I now know exactly what 5.75 inches looks like on my document. I'm going to take my little dragon guy, drag him over here to where his knuckle just touches that guide. And if it keeps jumping all over the place, you can just use your arrows to nudge him into place. Turn on free transform. Now here's the important thing. You're going to take that little anchor point in the middle, and you're going to drag it right on top of that knuckle. Now, just doing that by itself doesn't do anything. If I tried to scale him, look, his hand moves and comes off of there. That's worthless. But if I hold Alt or Option when I am scaling him, so I'm going to hold Option or Alt and Shift. Shift keeps him from doing this, right? And Alt keeps him from doing this. As long as I'm holding Option, it means relative to that anchor point. So now his knuckle is exactly in place, and all I have to do is scale him up until his nose touches that guide. Let go of my mouse button first, then my keys, hit enter. Now he's perfectly sized. Okay, this was a one-off guide. I can get rid of it now. So again, running through it quickly, we made a marquee that was the exact size we wanted to by using fixed size. Click it, snap it to one side or the other, whichever one you want to start. Whichever one you want to start from. It does not matter. Snap a guide to it. Deselect. Move our guy over. Free transform. Put your reference point, that anchor point, right on the point that needs to stay put. Option and Shift. Drag his nose out, and done. Okay? So in real time, you can see exactly how fast we can actually do these things. Okay? When somebody's not blabbing on a microphone, boring the living sin out of you, then it takes 30 seconds, absolute tops. We also said that he is 0.3 inches from the left-hand edge and 1.45 inches from the bottom. So, fixed size again, 0.3 inches, 1.45 inches, hit enter. Since I measured from the left and from the bottom, I'm going to snap this to the bottom and the left. And because I measured from the cut edge of the document, I'm going to do it from my guide here, not from the outer edge of the bleed. I'm going to snap a temporary guide here to the inside edges of both. Deselect. Now I'm just going to move him down to where his thumb touches that guide. His nose touches that guide. And then that can go away. And that can go away. Because this wasn't based on any kind of margin. This was just where is he on the document, period. He's not relative to any kind of margin. So I don't need to keep those guides in there. Now he is perfectly in place, and I don't have to. All I have to do is just mask him to fit the design. He's in the right spot. He's the right size. Again, straightforward, super, super simple. And that's Photoshop. Again, the exact same thing works with photographs. It works with everything else. Yeah, you get the idea. So anyway, that's the long of it. Hopefully you fast forwarded to the parts that you didn't care about or that you already knew. And hang on for just a little bit longer, and I will show you a quickie way to measure an irregular shape like that hopefully helps you out. So tune in next time, and I appreciate your time. Thanks. So sometimes it's more difficult to transfer the measurements on a complex image or one that is that's partly hidden. So this dragon here, we have large parts of him that are completely hidden, so we can't really measure him as a whole. And the places where we can measure easily, probably between here and there, the widest parts, I can't just measure diagonally, and it's really hard to judge how far across is with nothing down there. So if you don't if you don't have an L ruler with you, then just grab a pad or a sheet of paper. Cardboard's even easier because it's a bit more rigid. But all you have to do is simply line up a bottom edge, draw a line all the way up, flip them around. And all I'm doing is basically getting this as squared off as I can on that edge, and that's just barely peeking out right there. Draw myself a line down like that, and now I have two easy points to measure across, and I can very easily see now that from his nose to the tip of his hand is 5 3/4 inches without any guesswork.